You've heard of the Frog Prince. Did you know there is a frog princess? Not just the Princess and the Frog from the Disney version, it's a very old and widespread folklore tradition. I've talked a lot about animal bridegroom stories, Beauty and the Beast sort of stories where women have to marry some kind of animal or creature and then it turns out to be an enchanted dude all along, but that does exist the other way around as well, and yes, it does often involve a slimy creature in a bed with you, but a happy ending. Most versions of this story start with a king usually who wants his 3 sons to marry and devises a great way for them to pick wives. He says, each of you shoot an arrow and you will find your bride wherever your arrow lands. The arrows of the 2 oldest sons land by some beautiful woman, but the youngest son, his arrow lands by a frog. But it's not over because the king is very particular about his daughter-in-laws apparently, and he always assigns some kind of tasks that they have to then perform. There are always traditional female tasks like spinning cloth or baking bread, and the frog always wins. Like the frog does better than the 2 human women, sometimes because the human women are lazy even though they're beautiful and human, and sometimes because the frog is magical and just can accomplish things humans can't. Still, however, the dude is always ashamed of the frog and doesn't want her to be his wife. Understandable, until she ends up getting transformed into a beautiful human. Now, in some of the stories I'm going to tell you, she's just a frog who then gets turned into a human. Sometimes, like a lot of the animal bridegroom stories, she was a person in the first place but got enchanted to look like the frog. One of my favorites is an Italian version that starts out as many fairy tales do, with a man and woman who desperately want a child. And they pray and pray and pray for the child, and then they get one. But it's a frog. The woman gives birth to a female frog. Now, this is actually fairly common in fairy tales. If you've seen my video over the Pig King where the woman gives birth to a little pig, this one continues similarly. They love the frog, they raise her, they teach her music and educate her, and she ends up having one of the most beautiful singing voices in the world. So she practices and sings all day, and everyone in the village hears her gorgeous voice. Just imagine like Cynthia Erivo wicked riffs everywhere, like stunning voice, and everyone's like, who is that beautiful girl with the gorgeous voice in that house? Because she never comes outside, we don't see her, because they don't guess frog. So one day the prince comes by, he hears her singing, and he falls instantly in love with her because her voice is so amazing. And so he asks the dad, can I marry the girl who is singing in your house, your daughter? And the dad says, I'm not to talk to my daughter, which respect. So he asks the daughter and she says yes, if she can be taken to the royal chamber and put in his bedroom without being seen. And he agrees to that. And so she gets taken to the palace, put in the bedroom, she hides under the covers in the bed. And so he gets in, thinks she's not there, he gets under the covers and, gets ready to go to sleep. And then it says, at midnight the frog crept out and onto the prince's breast. Half asleep, he took the frog in his hand and threw her to the floor, and she hopped angrily down the steps and went home. Now, it says the next day he was sorry he had thrown the frog to the floor and became sad and melancholy. And at least in my English translation, it is not clear whether he knew that was his bride or he's just sad he was mean to a random frog in his bed. But it doesn't matter. He goes back to town, hears her singing again, and says, I again need this woman. So the dad says, hey, he wants to try it again. And she's like, all right, but this time I'm just going to go in a carriage and I'm not even going to hide. And he's just going to have to see me as I am. Well, on the way there, she passes 3 fairies standing in the road, and one of them is choking on a fishbone. And apparently none of the other fairies know the Heimlich. But apparently the frog is so cute driving a little carriage drawn by little tiny animals that they all start laughing, and the laughter makes her cough up the fishbone. So the first fairy's like, I'll give you like a real carriage full of silver and gold and real horses. The second one says, I'll give you beautiful clothes and gowns. And the third one, who she saved, says, I'll transform you into a beautiful human. And they do. So she drives on to the palace and greets the prince, and they have a joyful wedding. Now, the Russian version is really cool and has this beautiful art. Now in this one, the brothers shoot the arrows and one of them gets the frog, but she still turns to a princess at night. So he sleeps with her every night in human form, which also happens in a lot of the male animal bridegroom stories. And like in those stories, one night he burns her frog skin while she's in human form, and she's like, no, you did that too soon. If you'd been patient, I would have been freed of my curse, but now you're gonna have to perform all these tasks to get me back. And that one, she has been cursed by Koshei or Koshei, this, not sure how to pronounce it, I've just read it, this death deity, male antagonist character in Russian folklore. So our guy has to go to Baba Yaga, and she has to help him perform these tasks to win her back and free her from the death deity. Now there's another fun German one called The Tale of the Toad, or Paddocky, or The Frog and Cherry sometimes. It starts kind of Rapunzel, where this mom is like craving parsley like crazy, or cherry in one version, and she steals it from a nun who then gets so mad that she curses her daughter to be a frog. So she's a frog because a nun cursed her. So girl's just living out being a toad, and then the dad again sends his 3 sons out to accomplish tasks, and whoever can do it can rule the kingdom. So this isn't for marriage, but the youngest son comes across the toad, and the toad helps him accomplish the tasks. Finding linen that's small enough or fine enough to fit through a ring, and then a dog that can fit inside a walnut shell. So he does those first 2, and his brothers don't, with the help of the toad. But then the third one is that he has to return with the most beautiful bride, and whoever comes back with the most beautiful bride's gonna get the kingdom now. So the frog's like, take me, trust me, and he's like, okay, and his trust is rewarded because again she goes in a carriage that is drawn by rats with hedgehogs for outriders, a mouse for a coachman, other frogs as footmen, or I guess they're frogs, she's a toad. And anyway, because of his trust, when she turns a corner, they all turn into humans, including her, and she's beautiful, the most beautiful, and it's all, you know, human-sized finery, and then he wins, and they get to be king and queen. Now, I have to also include some stories that fall into this category where instead of a frog, it's just a very, very tiny woman, including Doll in the Grass. This is a Norwegian story, and it starts out the same. These 3 princes get sent to complete these tasks. The youngest prince comes across this tiny woman named Doll in the Grass. He tells her, I know you're really small, but you're also really cute, so like if you help me with these tasks, I'll marry you. And she's like, okay. She does one of the tasks, which is to make him a shirt in a day, but of course it's very tiny. Then there's a whole escapade where she ends up riding in her little tiny carriage and falling into a lake. And our dude is horror struck, like, oh, well, she's gone now. But then a merman comes out of the water and brings her, and she's full size now. So it turns out the brothers failed at their tasks, and the wives they brought home are just really ugly, and the king drives them away when they get there because he's like so grossed out by them. But the youngest son now has this human-sized, gorgeous wife, so he wins. On that note, I have to add there's a Vietnamese version, and I could be pronouncing this wrong again, Nong Ut, which is roughly Miss Little Finger. In this one, a couple again really want a child, and they end up having one, but she's no bigger than a finger. It's very Thumbelina as well. But they don't want her, so they abandon her in a watermelon patch, and while she's there, a prince comes along, and she becomes pregnant with his child. Don't worry though, when I first read that, I was like, wait, let me read this again. She what now? In some versions, he eats a melon rind and throws it in the water, and she gets pregnant from being in the same water as the melon rind he ate. And just a different bodily fluid? Now, food and drink are often the cause of supernatural pregnancy in folktales and fairy tales. There's a French translation from 1886 where there's a footnote saying he made water in the water. He peed in it. But whatever, she gives birth to a human-sized child, yikes, and she shows up with his kid, the dad does bride contests again, she wins them all, and she gets transformed to normal size. Check out my podcast, Folktales and Fairy Lore, link is in my bio, plus my book, Dust Spells, which is a reimagining of the Brothers Grimm story, The 12 Dancing Princesses, or The Shoes That Were Danced to Pieces. Have a magical day!